A mafia boss's wife catches a poor, ragged girl singing for her paralyzed son. A girl with dark skin and braided hair slipped past the armed guards of a fortress and saw the boy in the velvet blazer sitting in a heavy, frozen silence. His eyes were hollow, stripped of his childhood. Then she did something no one expected. She began to sing, not for a few coins, not for mercy from the guards, but simply to pull him out of the shadows. What happened next would shake the foundations of the Romano Empire forever. Elena Romano was the queen of the city's most dangerous underworld. Her husband's name was whispered in fear, a man whose power was built on iron and blood. They had everything the world could offer: luxury, influence, and a mansion that stood like a marble cathedral. Yet, behind the bulletproof glass of her estate, Elena's greatest agony was a debt she couldn't pay. It was the haunting silence of a son whose voice had been stolen by tragedy. Her only son, Gabriel, once a vibrant boy who filled the hallways with life, had been left paralyzed after a targeted strike that nearly tore their family apart. Once his joy was the heartbeat of the home. Once he played with the energy of a prince destined to rule. But now he sat trapped in a modern wheelchair, staring at the high stone walls, his spirit locked away. At first, Elena tried to buy his recovery with the Romano fortune. She brought in world-class surgeons from Switzerland, specialists from Japan, and experimental therapists from the finest clinics in the world. Every attempt ended in the same cold, crushing failure. Gabriel's spark didn't return. His smile remained a memory. He rarely moved, rarely spoke, spending his days in the garden like a statue of the boy he used to be. Elena, though elegant and powerful before the world, felt her heart shattering every time she looked at him. She saw him drifting further into the darkness. But one humid afternoon, the silence of the Romano estate was broken by a sound that money could never buy. The Romano estate was a monument to power, a fortress of cold marble and high stone walls that even the sun seemed hesitant to touch. To the world, the name Romano meant absolute authority, but within these walls, it was a brand of suffocating grief. Armed men in dark suits stood like statues at every corner, their eyes scanning for threats that had already taken so much. Their presence was a constant reminder of the hit that had changed everything: the screech of tires, the shattered glass, and the sudden, horrific end to Gabriel's mobility. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of expensive lilies and the sterile silence of a hospital. Elena watched her son, Gabriel, as he sat in his velvet blazer, his blonde hair neatly combed by a nanny's hand. He was a prince in a gilded cage. He didn't look at the gardens he once ruled or the toys that now gathered dust. His eyes, once bright with the fire of his father's lineage, were now fixed on the floor, reflecting a despair that no amount of blood money could wash away. The mansion wasn't a home. It was a sanctuary of tears. Beyond the jagged iron spikes of the estate's perimeter, a different world breathed. Samira stood there, her dark skin glowing under the afternoon sun and her simple, worn cardigan a stark contrast to the opulence behind the gate. She looked at the towering stone walls, sensing the coldness that radiated from them. Most people walked faster when they passed the Romano mansion, lowering their eyes in fear of the men in dark suits. But Samira didn't move. She felt a pull toward the silence, a heavy, aching quiet she recognized all too well. Slowly, she adjusted the strap of her aged wooden guitar. Her fingers, small but sure, found the familiar strings. With a deep breath, she began to play. The melody was raw, a soulful hum that started low before rising like a prayer. Then her voice broke through the stifling air. It wasn't the polished sound of a trained performer. It was a river of emotion, pure and untamed. The song drifted over the iron bars and through the manicured hedges, piercing the atmosphere of fear. For the first time in years, the fortress didn't just echo with footsteps. It vibrated with life. Inside the garden, the song arrived like a warm breeze in a frozen room. Elena froze near the marble fountain, her breath hitching as the raw, soulful melody enveloped the air. It was a sound that didn't belong in a fortress of secrets. It was too honest, too bright. She turned her gaze toward Gabriel, expecting to see the usual hollow stare, but what she witnessed stole the air from her lungs. Gabriel's head had lifted. His hands, usually limp against the dark green velvet of his blazer, were trembling with a sudden electric energy. A small, tentative smile tugged at the corners of his lips, and his fingers began to tap a rhythmic pulse against the armrest of his wheelchair. It was a spark of life she had spent millions trying to buy, yet here it was, ignited by a voice from the street. Alina moved toward the gate, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the ornate iron bars, she saw her, a girl in a worn cardigan, eyes closed, pouring her soul into an aged guitar. In that moment, the Mafia queen didn't see a trespasser. She saw a miracle. The heavy iron gates, usually a barrier between life and death, groaned as Alina signaled for them to open. The guards tensed, their hands hovering near their holsters, their faces masks of confusion. This was a violation of every protocol they lived by. Bringing a stranger into the inner sanctum of the Romano Empire was unthinkable. But Alina didn't care for protocols. She saw only the light returning to Gabriel's eyes, a flame she refused to let flicker out. "Step back," she commanded, her voice like velvet-wrapped steel. She walked toward the girl with the wooden guitar and offered a hand that was soft yet trembling. "Come inside, my son. He needs to hear you." Samira hesitated, her dark brown skin glowing under the shadow of the massive stone pillars, but she saw the mother's desperation behind the queen's elegance. As they walked toward the garden, Alina moved with a newfound purpose, shielding the girl from the cold stares of the men in suits. She was hiding this small, pure miracle from the shadows of her husband's world. Desperate to keep the melody playing before the darkness noticed it had been interrupted. The garden, once a cemetery of quiet grief, transformed into a private auditorium of hope. Day after day, Samira sat on a stone bench, her weathered guitar resting against her muted gray dress as she shared the language of music with the boy in the velvet blazer. She didn't just sing, she taught Gabriel how to feel the vibrations of the strings, showing him how a single note could carry the weight of a story. Alina watched from the shadows of the veranda, her breath catching as the impossible began to unfold. Gabriel's recovery defied every medical chart. Spurred by the desire to reach for the guitar, his voice, once a raspy whisper, grew clear and confident. "Sing it again," he would say, his blonde hair catching the sunlight. But the true miracle was below the waist. As Samira played a rhythmic, driving beat, Gabriel's legs began to twitch in time with the music. A toe shifted, a knee tightened. The music was a bridge, carrying his spirit back into a body that had long been a prison. In the harmony of their laughter, the dark Romano legacy seemed a world away. The warmth of the garden could not hold back the cold front that always accompanied the return of Lorenzo Romano. When the heavy tires of his black sedan crunched over the gravel, the air in the mansion seemed to thin. He stepped out, a man carved from granite and shadow, his eyes instantly noting the subtle shifts in his domain. The guards stood straighter, their faces tight with a nervousness that hadn't been there an hour ago. Lorenzo didn't miss the stray melody drifting from the courtyard, a sound too light, too innocent for a house built on secrets. He found Alina standing by the glass doors, her expression a mask of practiced calm that he knew too well. "There is a new frequency in this house, Alina," he remarked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. To him, every change was a potential breach, every stranger a hidden blade. He looked past her toward the garden, his gaze narrowing at the girl with the braided hair and the aged wooden guitar. Suspicion flared in his chest. In his world, people didn't give for free, and miracles were just traps waiting to be sprung. The afternoon sun hung suspended like a golden witness as Samira began her most haunting melody yet. Her eyes were closed, her fingers dancing over the aged guitar strings with a feverish passion that seemed to pull the very soul out of the garden. Gabriel sat gripped by the rhythm, his face flushed, his blonde hair glowing in the light. The music wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a physical force, a command to his sleeping nerves. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol at his hip, but he froze as the impossible unfolded. Gabriel's hands gripped the modern metal handles of his wheelchair. With a sharp, focused intake of breath, the boy in the velvet blazer began to rise. His knees shook violently, a leaf in a storm, but he didn't falter. Inch by agonizing inch, he pushed against the gravity of his past. Then, in a moment of holy silence that shattered the Mafia's cold history, Gabriel stood. He was upright, his feet pressing firmly into the earth for the first time since the accident. The spirit had finally commanded the flesh to wake. Lorenzo's hand remained frozen on his holster, his eyes darting from his standing son to the girl with the guitar. The instinct of a predator warred with the shock of a father. "Who is she, Alina?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous vibration that usually preceded a storm. "You brought a stranger into this house. You bypassed our security for a beggar." He stepped forward, his shadow looming over Samira's small frame, a dark cloud threatening to extinguish the light she had brought. Alina didn't flinch. She stepped between her husband and the girl, her chin lifted with a defiance that matched his own iron will. "She is not a beggar, Lorenzo. She's the only person who did what your doctors and your soldiers could not." She gestured toward Gabriel, who remained upright, his face radiant with the effort. "Look at our son. You spend your life protecting this family with blood and lead, but it was her song that brought him back to us." For the first time, the Mafia boss saw the girl not as a threat, but as the architect of a miracle. The silence that once haunted the Romano estate was finally broken, not by the heavy footsteps of guards, but by the harmonious blend of two voices rising from the garden. Alina watched from the veranda, a soft smile gracing her lips as she saw Samira, no longer a girl in a worn cardigan, but a daughter of the house, patiently guiding Gabriel through his daily walk. The boy in the velvet blazer moved with a steady, confident stride, his hand resting lightly on Samira's shoulder for balance rather than support. Lorenzo stood beside his wife, his dark suit no longer feeling like armor, but merely clothes. He had traded his suspicion for a newfound sense of peace, realizing that the greatest power he could wield was the protection of this fragile, beautiful joy. The Romano name, once a whispered curse in the city's dark alleys, began to echo with a different frequency, one of healing and unexpected mercy. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the stone pillars, the family sat together, a new symphony beginning where the shadows had once lived. The music had turned a fortress into a home.